I haven't heard that name in years. Never knew anyone like him. Always eating, chewing, munching, consuming, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Nothing could stop him. And what? Now you're telling me he's gone missing? Last seen him wrapping himself up in a big cocoon. Huh. I always told him he'd meet a dead end. That very hungry caterpillar.
A few weeks back, I reviewed Western Lane, a snacky entry in the Booker Shortlist 2023, and my overall assessment was, what? Western Lane? Was that the one about tennis? I mean, squash? This irked me, because while it didn't exactly sprinkle confetti in my eyes, it didn't do anything especially wrong. The story was fine, the writing was solid, and the characters were, well, they weren't terrible. So the question remained, why was it so mediocre? I mentioned in my review of Prophet Song that I had my issues with Cormac McCarthy's style. When it works fantastically, and it's why a few of his books are some of my favourites. But it's also limited as a means of telling a story. Stories about madness, stories about violence, stories about confusion and displacement and loss. These are the stories that such an impressionistic and confrontational style fit. When the same style is used in a more hopeful novel, we instead feel it dragging us out of the story instead of immersing us in it. When the story is so fundamentally at odds with the style through which it is told, we find ourselves more sitting alongside the novel rather than existing within it, and the result is apathy. Western Lane, while superficially about grief, felt more like a story about overcoming grief, about finding solace in family, friends and perseverance. To me at least. All that potential for hope and optimism was muted, had the colour drained from it, by the oppressive style from start to finish. The result? A book with no clear point. Now, I don't pretend to be an expert on anything much, apart from how to make a cracking beans on toast. So I went to a few of my English degree having friends and asked, what's the name for how well a novel matches its style and its story? What's it called when a horror novel is written like a Christian romance book? This group of nerds debated, as they are wont to do. Before one mentioned it was just an expected part of a good novel. It goes without saying. But, you whisper from under my bed, why are you trying to second guess the author's intentions? Surely if they've chosen a style, which is at odds with the story, then they're trying to make a deliberate point. They're trying to focus on an alternate angle which would otherwise be overlooked. Perhaps. I don't disagree this is a perfectly valid technique. See Catch-22 for more on that. But what about when there is no alternate angle? What about when the story ends and the result is a simple, What about when it feels more like the author had an interesting style, then found an unrelated story to showcase it, rather than coming up with a story and letting that inform which style to use? This week, I want to discuss one of my exemplars in the field of style narrative synchronicity, the sci-fi modern classic Flowers for Algernon. When I began writing this review, I couldn't name a single other piece Daniel Keyes ever wrote. I assumed none of his other pieces had a big enough profile, and it seems Wikipedia agrees. I wonder how it feels to be an author who is forever remembered as the writer of the famous novel such and such. For what it's worth, some of his other novels look interesting, but forget about all that, because today is about his 1966 novel, Flowers for Algernon, which was originally his 1959 short story, Flowers for Algernon. For this review, I went and read the original short story, and I was surprised by how similar it was to the finished novel. Wow, what a hot take. Let me put some ice on the burn that searing insight gave me. Well, I don't know. I figure because they were written almost a decade apart, there might have been some development of characters or story or themes. But no, stick a bike pump in the original short story, and sure enough, you'll get the novel. Meet Charlie Gordon. He may have an IQ of 68, but gosh darn it, he's got more heart than a blue whale. Charlie works at a bakery, attends literacy classes, and, crucially, wants to become smarter to be like everyone else, to connect with those around him. Two researchers at a local university choose Charlie for an experiment to improve his intelligence, and thus begins the heartbreaking story where we see Charlie's intelligence slowly improve, then, spoiler warning, start to decline. The meat of the story is watching how all of the relationships in Charlie's life change as he grows smarter. There's his relationship with his co-workers at the bakery. There's his romance with his teacher. There's the decay of respect towards and eventual contempt for the researchers who experimented on him as he surpasses them intellectually and begins to understand their true motives. And there's his relationship with his former self. Charlie's fresh perspective on the events of his own life as he develops the intellect to reflect on them. Which brings us to the style. Flowers for Algernon is an epistolary novel, and it really is the book that convinced me that style could ever work. Dracula sticks out in my memory as the novel that put me off. It would have worked better as a collection of first-person entries. All the epistolariness does is distract from the spooky vampire story. So, what's the difference in Well, as Keyes mentioned himself, the first person gives a good chunk of the story a sense of dramatic irony, which really is heartbreaking towards the end when Charlie notices how the people around him are upset, but can't understand why. On top of that, the diary entries give us a compelling tension between Charlie's thoughts and his ability to record them, which is constantly changing. Outside the epistolariness, The style is exactly what I want from a first-person story. Full of character, but without being obtrusive. Charlie comes across as painfully human, even when his intellect goes to his head and he starts acting all condescending. A particular passage that stuck with me is when Charlie reaches the zenith of his intelligence, and it's the only time the book indulges in a bit of abstract waffling, the kind that's unfortunately endemic to mainstream literary books today. It works here because it's got a purpose. It's a stylistic choice to illustrate the cusp beyond which Charlie's powers of description cannot venture, as opposed to an author showing off how well they can describe a particularly satisfying sneeze. So that's ours for Algernon, the Tory truly deserving of the subtle, clad and modern classic. Cowl whatticism might be having a small, strong bye.